Today is June 5th, 2008. I am Cassie Potasic, and it is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project in Culm, North Dakota. Can you please tell me your full name?
That's Ruben Richard Wolf.
All right. When and where were you born?
I was born in Headinga County on January 12th of 1933.
All right. Have you ever heard an interesting story about your birth?
No,
Do you know, was there a doctor or a midwife present?
at that time there was a doctor, but that was it, and I was born in a farmhouse back there in Headinga County.
All right. Can you please share some of your earliest memories with us?
You mean as far as growing up, or?
Yep, what's the earliest thing you remember?
Well, I remember my childhood days of getting up in the morning and getting ready to go to school, and we had to walk 3 miles to school every morning. Because gas was cheap back in them days, but still it was very important. Things were tough back then.
All right. Well, can you tell me about the school building?
Okay, the school building was a one-room school building, and there was probably about 20 kids going there from first grade to 8th grade. And that's the way it was back in them days. And we walked to and from school when weather permitted.
How did you get to school when it was...
Well, then my dad, I remember them as my early childhood days. He had a bobsled, and he had an old car body that he mounted onto that bobsled, and he took us to school with that because in the wintertime it's cold. It's too cold to walk.
Right. Can you tell me about your teachers?
Yeah, my first grade teacher, she had a hard time with me. Like I say, I didn't know how to speak English when I started grade school, and that was kind of an adjustment. And as far as I had a lot of, in fact, I think I was the teacher's pet, because one time I remember she sat me on her lap, and she didn't know anything about German, and she really tried to teach. She spent a lot of time with me teaching the English language. That's one of the memories I have, and it was just I have a lot of fond memories. It was a fun thing going to school in the dirty 30s.
Well, what were some of the classes that you took?
Well, remember reading, and we had spelling, arithmetic, and history. I think that was about it.
Which was your favorite?
My favorite was history.
Which subject was your least favorite?
Spelling.
Were you a good student?
I think I was. I never got a spanking from the teacher, so.
Right. Can you describe what the attendance situation was like in your school?
Pardon me, the attendance? Usually the attendance was, most kids made it to school. And they all had to be either brought there by their parents or they walked. But during the early fall and early spring, most kids walked.
Did you, when you were a little older, did you ever have to miss school to help out with work?
Oh
or
yes,
anything?
yes. Many times I missed a lot of school and threshing in the threshing days, and when my dad needed help, you know, working out the field. He started us out pretty young. I was 8 years old when I started driving tractor back then, and I remember it was really a challenge. Once I started driving tractor, I didn't want to go to school anymore.
All right. What did you do during recess at school?
Oh, we played hide and seek. It was one of the favorite games we had, and then we played fox and goose, and drop the handkerchief. I don't know if you know what that's all about. The kids would all stand around in a circle, and one would go around behind you, and you had to close your eyes. Then they dropped the hanky behind you, and you had to, if you didn't notice it, and you didn't pick it up and run after that person and touch them with the hanky, you were counted out.
Right. What other things did you do at recess? Did you have inside games?
No, not really. Oh, when the weather was bad, yeah, we had we sang old school songs, and that was probably about it. Wasn't a lot of inside activity. Most of it was outside.
All right. What did you bring to school for lunch?
Well, we brought, I remember, choke cherry sandwiches, and then we had some chicken sandwiches and homemade sausage, and it was homegrown. It was all natural food, organic, yeah.
Right. What was your favorite grade school memory?
Favorite grade school memory. Well, one of my favorites was recess playing. And another one of my my favorite memory was history class. It was always interesting for me.
Did you ever have school programs?
Yes, we had school programs every Christmas time. We had a Christmas program, and we observed all like Thanksgiving. That was all. All these occasions were very special back in them days, and kids were very much interested in those programs.
Can you describe a Christmas program for us?
Well, I remember we were all in a back room, and we all had to go out and face the audience and say our poems, and we were always instructed to say them very plainly and distinctly if we could. That's where I had trouble with my German. Sometimes a German word would come out here and there that shouldn't have been.
Right. Did you celebrate Valentine's Day?
Valentine, yeah, there was remember that. Everybody made a Valentine for your friends, and if there was a nice looking girl, you even made a special Valentine for the girls.
Right. How important was getting an education to your family?
It was very important, very important. The parents stressed, do your homework and strive for good grades. Do your best job.
Were you encouraged or discouraged from going to high school?
Well, no, never discouraged, and probably, like in my days, I come from a family of 12, so the younger brothers and sisters, they went to high school, and a lot of them went into college later on. But us older, the four of us oldest ones, we weren't discouraged, but there was just a lot of work to be done in them days, and the parents needed their kids' help.
Right. Then, is there anything else you'd like to share about your grade school years?
Yeah, not really. I think that's about all. That's a long time ago.
All right then, let's talk a little bit about your family. Were you close to any of your grandparents growing up?
Yes, on my father's side, my grandfather Wolf, I was pretty close to him.
Can you tell me about him?
He was a big farmer back in them days. He was one of the biggest farmers in Hettinger County. When he came over here, he was a big landowner, and he was a very hard worker. I remember that. And he raised wheat and barley and flax, and he must have been pretty progressive, because like I say, there was a big write-up on him in the Hettinger County Herald there a while back, probably 10 years ago, that he was one of the biggest farmers in Hettinger County at one time. And he come over here from the old country. He had a wagon, and he had a couple of oxen, and I think he had one horse, and he came with a lot of ambition. He must have to operate that kind of a setup that he had back in them days.
Did you ever hear any stories about when he came over to the United States?
Not really. Back in those days, we didn't ask a lot of questions. I guess we should have. It would have been nice to know all that. But once your parents are dead and gone, you can't ask them that anymore.
What else do you remember about your grandfather?
I remember one time he had a new Ford car. That was back in 1939. He bought a brand new 1940 Ford Coupe. And I remember that we were driving around out in the pasture, and he saw a coyote. And I remember he took after that coyote with that car, and he almost ran over it. I thought that was kind of neat. He really gave me a ride.
All right. Were you close to your grandmother?
I was close to her, but not as close as I spent a lot more time with my grandfather. My grandmother, she had a stroke. I think it was in 1936, and she was kind of handicapped from there on. But I remember she still done a lot of work in her home. They had a big family. They had 14 children, my grandfather. And I remember she was always busy in the kitchen cooking and canning and things like that.
Do you remember any of the foods she cooked?
Yeah, I remember she made, it was called liver sausage, and that was my grandfather made. That was his own recipe, and I remember that she canned a lot of that, and that was Well, back in them days, they just preserved everything. They canned everything, you know. There was no refrigerators or anything like that. But she was a hard worker.
Right. Did you know your mother's parents?
I never got to know my mother's parents.
All right. Were you close to any other members of your family from that generation? Any great aunts or uncles?
Yeah, I had a lot of uncles that I was pretty close to. I remember, like I say, my grandfather was a big landholder, and I remember they put up a lot of hay, and I used to have to run the rake, set in back of the old tractor when running the rake and dumping it, and then they'd come along later on what they call it a hay bucker, and they bucked it all together on a pile, and they pushed it together, and they made the stacks by hand. It was a lot of labor. You didn't need no exercise program to stay in shape. I remember that.
Right. Were you close to any of your mother's brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I had a brother's name was Edwin. I always called him Uncle Edwin, and I was very close to him. He was married to my dad's sister, and there was a family. They had a family of 12, and there was 12 in our family, so there was a lot of double cousins there. We used to have a lot of fun together. Work and play, and mostly work.
So can you describe what it was like when you'd all get together?
Yeah, like I say, we always had a lot of fun, and sometimes we got into a little mischief, but no, not too much. When we did, we usually got corrected, and it never happened again.
What kinds of mischief?
Oh, we'd go out, when we were at Grandma and Grandpa Wolf's place, we'd go out and ride the sheep, and we weren't supposed to do that, and we had a regular rodeo going on there a lot of times, and one time we got caught, and we all got a spank for it, and it never happened again.
Did you have a favorite cousin?
Yeah, I would say Arlen was my favorite cousin. And he was about 2 months older than I was, so we were like two peas in a pod, really.
Can you tell me what kind of person he was?
I remember he was a hard-working kid, and later on, what I really remember about him when he got hurt real bad. He was burning stubble, and he got his pant leg caught on fire, and by the time he got it out, it burned his legs so bad they had to take his leg off up here. But that never slowed him down. He just kept working. He went up to Alaska and he worked on the pipelines, and he was semi-driver, and he did that. His hand was burned real bad, but he just wouldn't give up. He just was was kind of what you call a working fool, I guess.
Right. Did you have a favorite aunt or uncle?
Yeah, like I told you, my uncle Edmund, he was kind of, and this Arlen, that was his dad, this Uncle Edmund. And he was a guy that was always full of fun, and always wanted you to do your best.
Right. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your extended family?
I guess that's about all I can all I can think of.
All right. Then can you tell me about your father?
Yeah, my father, he was a great person. I remember that. He just always give me good advice, and always encouraged you to do your very best. And if you go out and earn a dollar, be sure that you earn it. He was a hard-working man. Remember, he was a good mechanic, and he overhauled a lot of tractors. Remember when I went into the military, I never went to school for any kind of a mechanic. And when I was in the Air Force, I should say, I got on as a mechanic, and they asked me where I went to school. And I said, I never did go to school for it. Well, you're probably one of the best mechanics we have. So my dad was a good teacher.
Can you describe your relationship with him?
Yeah, I had a good relationship with him. Whenever he told me something, I'm more so than not, I always took his advice. Sometimes I thought I knew better, but I knew when he said something, he meant it. And back in them days, you didn't question. You knew that your parents loved you, and so you just done your best.
How did he express emotions?
Emotions he usually expressed them very calm and stern. But when he gave you that certain look, you knew what that meant. He didn't have to say it.
And what was his profession?
His profession, he was a farmer, and then he was also later on, he was an insurance agent.
How did he cope with hard times?
My father? Well, they went through some tough times in them dirty 30s. I remember my dad saying he seeded 7 years, and he never ever got his seed back in those 7 years. And he said he had enough grain in the bin, enough wheat to try for 7 years. And then remember 1939, I think it was, they started getting crops, and they had a bumper crop that year. I remember that. Uh, 30s were tough years. Things were very meager.
Do you know when and where he was born?
He was born in Gackle, North Dakota in 1904.
And when and where did he die?
He died in Hettinger County. That was in 1964.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your father?
I think that about covers it.
Right. Then can you tell me about your mother?
Well, I remember Mother. She was a very kind, loving person. She had to be to raise 12 kids back in the dirty 30s. She is a hard, remember she also worked very hard. And she done lots and lots of canning, had lots of chickens, and when it come time to putting up hay in the earlier years, she was out there stacking, making stacks, and as some of us kids were big enough already where we could pitch some of it up on top of the stack, and she usually made the stacks just perfectly. They shed water real good when she got done.
Can you describe your relationship with her?
I had a very good relationship with Mother. Again, she always gave good advice and encouraged us to work hard, study hard, and most of all, I think what she really planted in our hearts was love, to and never forget the Lord Jesus Christ. Never forget to love Him.
How did she express emotions?
She expressed her emotions in a very kind, soft way. And she had very good order in her family.
What was her profession?
She was just a housewife.
And how did she cope with hard times?
She had remembering my mother, she had a very strong faith, and she never questioned a lot of things. She just took it as things came, and she done a lot of praying, I know that. And she again wanted all of her children to live the right way, I guess, and always be thankful for what you have.
All right. Do you know when and where she was born?
She was born in Mound City, South Dakota in 1905.
And when and where did she die?
She died in Hettinger County in 1973.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about your mother?
I guess that pretty much explains my memories of her.
Right. Do you know how your parents met?
That I really don't know how they met anyway, but my grandfather or my dad's father and my mother's father, I don't know if they knew one another from over in the old country or anyway, they must have. Again, that's what if I'd have asked my dad or my mother, they could have told me that, but I think they probably knew each other over in the old country, and when they came over, they got together some way again, and I've often wondered how my mother and my dad got together, and like Uncle Edwin married one of my grandfather's daughters, and that's that's how they evidently got together. And that's about all I remember. Like I said, I wish I would have asked a lot more questions.
Right. And you said you had 12 children in your family? They had
Yeah,
12?
they have 12 children, yes.
Which one of your parents was the more strict parent?
Dad was, he was more or less the disciplinarian.
And how would you be disciplined?
Well, I know one thing, if they disciplined it, like it says in the good book, they didn't spare the rod sometimes. And most of the time when they didn't, you knew you had it coming.
All right. What kinds of things did your parents do for pastimes?
Well, what I remember, it was they were always busy, but they had time to go and visit their neighbors, and they always had a lot of company. And I remember a lot of times the yard was setting full of Model A's and Model T's. And they loved company, and they loved to associate with other people.
So can you tell me what it was like when people would come visiting?
Well, I remember they sang lots of songs. My mother she played the piano, and my Uncle Edwin, he played an accordion. And they used to make us kids sing while they played, and they loved music, and they went to some barn dances once in a while. I remember that.
Was music important to your family growing up?
It was very important.
All right. Were your parents involved in politics at all when you were growing up?
My dad was. But my mother, she was not as much as my father. My father was very adamant about politics. He always wanted the right people to be in office. And I remember they told us, or kept, when us kids got older, Dad, don't ever forget to vote. That's one thing they can't take away from you. You can vote, but I remember he emphasized that.
Right. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your parents?
I think that about takes care of it.
Okay. Then can you please tell me the birth order of your siblings?
Okay, my oldest sister, you want their name? Irene. She was born October of 1929. Then I had a sister, Vi. She was born in 1930. November. Maybe you don't need that. And then it was me. I was born in, January 12th of 1933. Then I have a brother, Vern. He was born August 4th of 1934. And then I had a sister, May. She was born in 1937. Then I had a brother, Mel. He was born, I think it was December 21st of 1938. And I had a brother, Archie. He was born January 12th of 1942. Same day I was born. And then I had a brother, Ardeen. He was born February 21st of 19... What did I tell you? Archie was...
Archie was 42.
He was born in... Ardeen was born in 43. I forget the month, though. Then I had a brother, Virgil. He was born May 21st of 1944. And then I had a sister, Georgine. She was born in 45. And a sister, Bernadine. Did I say John? Bernadine. She was born in, forget the month, year 46. And Russell, the youngest brother. See, he's 59, so I forget the month he was born in, but he was 59 years old. You should have 12 of them there.
Yep. All right. Which one of your siblings were you closest to?
I was close to all of them, I guess. If I'd have to, I'd have to say they were all close.
Right. Do you have any memorable stories about any of them when you were growing up?
Well, there were so many things that went on at. Well, I remember we just had, as a family, we were very close, and like I say, we done a lot of singing, and a lot of every one of them loved music, and a lot of them played instruments, and it was just we used to have a great time. I know that. We went to a lot of barn dances when we got a little bit older, and then they started having dances in Quonset buildings and things like that. We just had a lot of clean fun back then.
Did all the brothers and sisters get along well together?
Yes.
Was there any competition in the family?
Well, there was always, sometimes a little competition, but I guess competition is good. That's I always thought it was. If somebody done it better than you wanted to show them, well, I can do it better than that.
Okay. What was it like when a new baby came into the family?
Well, I guess it was a joy. It was joy to have another brother or another sister.
All right.
And all these children, they were born at home, not none of them in a hospital. Remember the old Dr. Hill was his name from Reach, and he assisted my mother with every one of them.
Are there any interesting stories about their births?
Well, I guess it was, like I say, it was just a joy to have another brother and a sister. You know, I guess that was the interesting part.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add about your brothers and sisters?
I guess that pretty much would cover it. Maybe when the interview is over, I'll probably remember a lot more.
All right. Okay. Can you tell me about the chores you did when you were growing up?
Yeah, we had a lot of chores to do, and remember we all helped one another, and everybody had their own little thing to do, you know. And I remember Dad wanted things done right when we milked or when we, no matter fed the cattle or whether it had to be done just right. There was no sloughing off.
And what was your thing to do?
Now, mostly, I helped with the milking a lot of times, but most of the time I done a lot of the earlier. I helped my dad a lot with mechanic work. When I was the oldest, and I guess some of the younger brothers they done a lot of the chores. And I remember as far as hauling hay, that's my brother, my next brother Laverne. Him and I, we done most of the hay hauling and the hard work, because we were the oldest. We had to make the tracks, I guess.
What were some of the chores that you kind of liked having to do?
I remember feeding the cows. I like to do that, and feeding the horses. The barn was full of new mown hay, and that I can still smell that fresh hay, and it just smelled good to me. And whenever I get into the barn, even today, when I smell it, I think back of those good old days.
Right. Are there any chores that you especially disliked?
No, not really. I knew they had to be done. I guess, some things you like to do better than others, but we knew it had to be done, and we did strive. I remember we didn't slough off, and we had to do a good job. As my dad, for some reason, and we, I guess how they kind of drove that home. Do a good job no matter what you do. I guess that's the way we were kind of brought up back in them days. And you didn't get paid. I guess you didn't expect it either. They brought you up and they fed you right, and but back in them days, things were tough. People needed their money to make things click.
Did you ever have to help out inside the house?
Very, very seldom that I helped with the house. And I guess maybe some little odds and ends, but never really like scrubbing the floors or anything like that. My sister's done such a good job, I couldn't even compare with them.
Did you ever have to help in the family garden?
Yeah, we had to, remember, we had to hoe in the trees and in the potatoes. We had to, remember, we had to keep them nice and clean.
Okay. Were there any differences between summer and winter chores?
Yeah, there was. Summer chores they were more pleasant. I know that. It wasn't so cold. And the winter chores, it's. Remember, you got cold hands. I know that, and cold feet. But back in them days, we didn't have the kind of clothes they have nowadays. I remember sometimes my hands were so cold. I come in the house, I couldn't feel them. So.
Were you ever hired out to work for a neighbor or a relative?
Yeah, yeah. Usually in the fall of the year, when we had our work all done, and some neighbors, I remember Dad used to say, well, we have our work done now. Tomorrow or the next day, you go over and help one of the neighbors. Or I remember we had neighbors by the name of Olsons, Martin Olsons, and we used to, threshing days especially. When we were done threshing at home, my dad had a thrash machine, and then he thrashed throughout the countryside, and we all had to help haul bundles.
Can you describe a little more about threshing time?
Yeah, I remember that was a busy time of the season. Threshing, people were bringing in their crops. I remember there was 8 to 10 bundle teams, and mostly had horses to draw the wagons. And it used to be a challenge which one could load up I remember I had a bundle team. I think I was 12 years old. We'd see which one could load up the biggest load, just for the challenge of it. And it was hard work because you had a lot of blisters in your hands at night. But it was a fun time. Remember us bundle haulers, when we got done on the day, and then at night we had a little extra energy left, and we used to do wrestle in the haystacks. To unwind, I guess.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to share about threshing or chores when you were growing up?
I guess that pretty much sums it up what I remember of it.
Okay. All right. Can you please tell me about the home you grew up in?
I remember our home was, that again, back in them days, was very meager, but it was, I guess, comfortable in those days. It was a three-bedroom home. I remember it was all on one level. And like with 12 kids, we had to double up in our beds. I remember us brothers, there was about 4 of them sleeping in one bed, and sometimes 5. But it was comfortable. It was the cold winters, you stayed warm.
How did your family keep the house warm during
It was, my dad had it was a pot-bellied stove sitting in the living room. And of course they had the kitchen range. Mother used to cook on that, that threw off some heat. But still, it wasn't that comfortable. A lot of mornings you get up and there was no running water. And we, remember the water pail, we call it. There was a dipper hanging in there, and a lot of times that was froze into the water when we got up in the morning. But again, it was very meager, but I have a lot of fond memories about growing up. Things were tough, but they were good.
All right. How did your family try to keep your house cool during the summer?
Well, there again, the mother opened the windows, and and there were screens. I remember there were screens on the window, but it got very hot. I remember some of them early 30s, or I mean later 30s. I remember some of those. I mean, it was very, very hot. And I remember Mother used to be cooking in her kitchen, and the sweat was running off of her brow.
Right. Can you tell me about the rest of the rooms in your house?
There was, of course, the folks' bedroom, and then at that time, I remember when we were lived in that it was a 4-room house, I believe. We had 4 rooms. And at that time, there must have been at least 7, 8 kids at that time. And of course, as time went on, I remember Dad, he remodeled the house, he made it bigger, but that was later. But what was the question again?
The rooms in your house.
Oh, the rooms. Remember, weren't very big rooms. I would say probably the bedrooms were probably 14 by 14, something like that. And the living room, that wasn't a whole lot bigger. It was a fairly small house. It was probably 1,000 square feet. Of course, there was a basement, but the parents, nobody stayed in the basement. It was just used for store canned things and stuff like that. And of course, the furnace was down there, and the rest took a big coal bin because winters got cold. It took a lot of coal to heat the house.
When you were at home, did your family speak German?
Yes, that was. I think just about us older kids. The first 5 kids, I think, when none of us knew how to speak English when we went to school or when we started school. Folks spoke German pretty much all the time.
Did they encourage you to learn English?
Yeah, they did. Yes.
Can you tell us about taking baths when you were growing up?
Again, that was very meager too. I remember it was a bathtub was probably 3 foot long. And the boys, all of us boys, we used the same water, but we got cleaned up. And we had, it again was very, very meager. And the girls, when they all took their turns, and then Mother would change the water for them, and then and I remember the water got kind of gray.
Was there an order of who got to go first in the tub?
Usually the girls, they got to go first.
And how often did you take baths?
I think on an average, probably twice a week. You took a lot of sponge baths, I know that. But a real bath about twice a week.
And where did you get the water?
Where we lived, we had dark water. We lived in the cold country, and our water was kind of dark, and we had to clear our water. We'd put coal ashes into the water, and it would clear up the water. And then Mother would heat it on the stove, and that's we had to carry our water from the well or from the pump.
How far away was the pump?
It was probably about 800 feet from the house. A pretty good stretch when you had to carry a pail in each hand.
often were you supposed to brush your teeth?
We were supposed to brush them every day, and I think we pretty much that part we pretty much done every day, at least once a day. Sometimes twice a day. The girls sometimes, remember, they brush their teeth more often, but.
Right. And you told us a little bit about your garden, but can you tell us more about what you grew in the garden?
Okay, there was a lot of pumpkins, I remember. A lot of cabbage. My mother made lots of sauerkraut, I know that. And radishes and potatoes. It was just a lot of vegetables. I remember it was a big garden. And it seemed like Mother was canning something all the time, especially in the fall of the year.
Right. Who usually prepared the meals in your family?
My mother and my older sisters. I remember when they got old, they helped a lot. And I remember with 12 kids, it was a big table, and it took a lot of food.
Did you have specific places to sit when you
Yeah, we all had our place, and you never deviated from that. You had sat on your place, and that was it.
Were there other rules for dinner time?
Well, I remember before we started eating, we always prayed, and that was when you ate, you didn't slough off. You just ate. You had a certain, we had all the time we wanted to eat, but we ate because we had work to do. We had to get done.
Right. Where did you put food to keep it cool during the summer?
Well, I remember my dad they call it ice. They had a hole dug in the ground, and they had chunks of ice in there. It was called an ice house. And I remember a lot of times we would have to go. I remember myself doing that many times. Go to the ice house. Mother would ask, go and get a piece of ice to keep the water cool, and a lot of times they had their meat and things like that. If they had an open well, but my folks didn't have. I remember my grandfather had that. They had, but that was kind of the way they did it back then. They hung their meat down in a well, the meat pretty close to the water because it was cool down there, and it kept the meat from spoiling.
Right. You mentioned that your mother made a lot of sauerkraut. Do you remember how she made it?
Yeah, and them days she didn't have a shredder. She did that all I remember by she had a sharp knife, and she would cut that stuff up real fine, and it was quite a process. But I remember it really tasted good.
What were some of your favorite foods that she made?
Dumplings. Dumplings and sauerkraut was one of my favorites, especially if she had a special recipe. She put a little bit of ham and that sauerkraut, and she when she baked bread, she used to use that dough to make put that sauerkraut and meat inside that, and then she steamed them. I remember that was a very, very good dish.
Did you have any least favorite foods?
Pardon me?
Any least favorite foods? Any that you didn't like?
No, we pretty much ate what Mother made. because it all tasted good.
All right, you've mentioned making sauerkraut and canning, and you mentioned in passing about making sausage. Can you tell me how you did that?
Yeah, that was another process. My dad, he used to butcher from 10 to 12 pigs, or hogs, and then they'd. I remember that was a big process. It took well we normally we done all the butchering in one day. Then the next day, then they made all the sausage, and they used everything, and they and a lot of sausage. There was a big family, and it we grind up the meat, and we had a sausage stuffer. I remember I had to crank that sausage stuffer a lot of times. I remember it was hard work. When you got done with that, you had a good arm.
Would neighbors or relatives come to help out?
Yes, lots of neighbors. That again, Dad would go from place to place. The neighbor, few neighbors come and helped him, then he'd go and help the neighbors, and they did that for probably 2-3 weeks on end. All the neighborhood had their meat supply put up for the winter.
Right. Did your family make any other foods for themselves?
I think that's as far as like the vegetables, the garden produce. That was all canned, and the meat. Variety-wise, it wasn't like it is today. There wasn't much of. I remember cakes or anything sweet was pretty rationed, especially during the war. Everything. I remember flour was rationed, sugar was rationed, and I remember car tires, and there's just a lot of things, especially when the Second World War started. I remember that. They used to get, they call them stamps, and you could use them stamps to buy a little bit of sugar or I remember coffee, that was rationed.
Right. What was your family's attitude towards alcohol?
Well, back in them days, it was, there was some alcohol around, but my family was dead set against misuse of alcohol. It's not saying they didn't have a glass of wine once in a while, or I think back in them days they used a lot of it for medicine, especially 190. My dad used to make a kind of a cough medicine out of that stuff. I remember if nothing else helped, that knocked it out.
Did your family make their own wine or beer?
Yeah, my dad made some beer. My grandfather, I remember he made a lot of wine, but like my folks, they made some wine, but my dad mostly made beer.
Do you remember how it was done?
The beer, yeah, I remember. The wine, I know how he did. They had a I think about a 30-gallon barrel of. I remember it was a wooden barrel, and they put choke cherries in there, and they'd let them ferment for whatever time it took. And I mean, when it was done, it tasted good. It was a process that I think it took probably. They had to let it ferment for probably 2-3 weeks, something like that. But the choke cherries, they made very, very good wine.
Right. Did your family ever make ice cream?
Yes, lots of ice cream. 4th of July, that was a special. There was a hand-cranked ice cream freezer they had, and there again, I remember cranking that many times. 4th of July and special occasions, we always had homemade ice cream.
when you were growing up?
Well, as far as back then, I know there wasn't near the variety that we have nowadays, but it was nutritious food. I guess you didn't call any of that junk food.
Okay. Then can you tell me about what kind of clothes you wore when you were growing up?
Well, there again, we we made good use of our clothes, and I remember Mother done a lot of patching. I remember going to school sometimes with patch upon patch, but at least they were they were clothes. It wasn't anything fancy, but there again it was meager.
Were most of your clothes store-bought or handmade?
A lot of it in the earlier years, Mother made a lot of our clothes, and later on, she bought some, but she still made a lot of the clothes.
How often did you get new clothes?
Well, like shoes, probably once a year. You got a pair of new shoes, and you you had to take very good care of them. You had to make them last. And in the summertime, we went when we were young. We went barefooted a lot of times, and I guess that was fun too. We had the feet got pretty tough. You could run. You could run over glass. I think they could.
Right. Did anyone in your family embroider or quilt or crochet?
Yeah, my mother done a lot of embroidering, and later on, I remember my older sister, had done quite a bit of it. A lot of embroidering. And my mother made these things. I don't know what the kind of thing they're called, doilies they put on. She made a lot of that kind of stuff later on when her girls got was old enough to where they could do a lot of the work, and I remember her doing that.
Right. Is there anything else you'd like to add about clothing when you were growing up?
Well, I guess to sum it up, I remember clothes we had to take very good care of them. I mean, and I guess we were all happy that we had clothes, and well, we never went without, but I mean, it's not like today, I know that. Clothes, and it wasn't a big, you went to school with a patch on, nobody ever said anything.
Okay. Do you remember when your family got electricity?
Yes, and I remember the REC, Rural Electric, they went past my father's farm there in 1946. They got electricity. Before that it was a kerosene lamp and we called it a mantle lamp, gas lamp. But I remember when we got electricity in the house and Dad turned on the light switch, and all his kids says, "Oh, it's so bright in here."
So how did electricity change your life?
Well, it made it a lot more simple. And electricity was cheap back in them days. And it just made life much more simple, and it was a blessing to have it.
All right. When you were growing up, did your family always have a car?
As far as I can think back, yeah, my dad always had a car. I remember his first car was a Model T, and then later on he got a Model A. And then later on, a little bit later than that, and I think in 1938, he bought, it wasn't a new car, but he bought a 38 Ford, four-door.
Okay. How about a telephone? Did your family always have a telephone?
No, no, let's see, when we got rural telephones, I was already gone from home at that. That was in the earlier, or probably middle 50s, something like that, over in that area. We got rural telephones.
How was that? How did that change your life? Getting telephone.
Well, that made life again a lot more. It was a lot more pleasant to call up, and if you needed parts or something like that, you call the parts dealer, or if you needed anything, you get called. You know, it was just another good thing, I guess. And again, it was reasonable.
All right. And how about a radio? Did your family have a radio?
My dad had. I remember the first radio he had. It was it was a 6-volt. It used a 6-volt car battery. And I remember it didn't come in very clear. I remember when the Second World War broke out. My dad he was listening real close to the radio. He had his ear right up to the radio, and I remember that morning, Dad got up and he said, "Yep," he says, "Now we're in war. We were attacked by the chaps in Pearl Harbor." And I remember all the neighbor boys. They didn't wait to get drafted. They volunteered. They wanted to keep their country free. I remember that as a lot of young guys went and volunteered.
What else do you remember about World War II?
Well, mostly about, like I said before, things got rationed. You know, a lot of things you couldn't buy because, you know, they needed all that to make war material, I guess. We didn't want to let the chaps come over here. Yeah, that's as far. It was just during the war. Things were tight. That's he couldn't. I remember Dad. He couldn't get a lot of parts that he needed for it. And they usually had them made, or my dad was a pretty good blacksmith. He made a lot of his parts.
Was it hard on your family being German during the war? Did anyone look down on you?
Well, maybe a little bit at one time in school, but we never took it serious. I guess we accepted it, and it was kind of a little friction there, you know.
Is there anything else you remember about the war?
I guess that pretty much covers it. What I remember.
Right. Well, let's go back in time just a little bit, and you've talked a little bit about the Dirty 30s. Can you tell me what else you remember about that time?
Yeah, I remember the Russian thistles. Nothing else grew in them days. And the Russian thistles, seemed like for some reason them things grew real well. And Dad used to, you know, he had a big timber he pulled behind the horses, and he pulled those big tumbleweeds out of the ground. They had a pretty good root, I remember that, and he piled them up, and then I remember he went and hauled them home in the fall of the year for cow feed. What I remember about that, he loaded them up on a hay rack, and I had to go up in there, and we had to step them down so he could get more on them. I remember they were really a lot of stickers in there. You used to come home and your legs were, were bleeding. But that's what they used for cow feed. There's nothing else grew, but them Russian thistles, for some reason, they grew. They must have grew from the hot weather or something.
Did you ever experience any dust storms?
I remember some dust storms. Yeah, it got so bad that I mean you couldn't. It was like a blackout blizzard a lot of times, like a snow blizzard. The air was just full of dust. And I remember then when the grasshoppers came in, they were so thick that I remember you used to look up in the sun and they almost blocked out the sun. There were so many of them up there. And when they come down and land on anything that was green, they just mowed everything off. There was just millions and millions of locusts at that time. Or they come down on the fence posts, the old fence posts, and they sat on there and they ate those fence posts. Them fence posts looked like brand new ones. They chewed off all that old dead wood. They were hungry.
Do you remember the WPA?
Yeah, my dad, I remember he worked on the WPA days. And sometimes I got to go along. I was pretty small, but I remember he drove up there. It was Havelock. It was about 4 miles from his farm, and he drove up there every morning with a team of horses. And sometimes I remember it was pretty cold, and Dad sat on top of the wagon. They got kind of a seat up there, and underneath there was a little windbreak. I used to lay underneath there so I didn't freeze to death. Yeah, them were WPAs. I guess that back in them they'd give people, the people got a little bit something out of working there, because things were tough back in them 30s.
What about the CCCs?
The CCs, I remember a little bit. I had an uncle that was in the CCCs. And then we had I remember some of the neighbors, they spent some time. In that organization.
Right. Is there anything else you remember about the 30s?
I guess that pretty much covers what I remember.
All right then. We'll switch over to a little bit nicer topic. Can you tell me about religion when you were growing up? How important was it to your family?
Religion, it was very important. It was. I remember going to church. I think every Sunday, and my dad never ever worked on a Sunday. That was a rest day for him. He was very adamant about that. He never, no matter how busy they were, but the people back them days they really didn't work on Sunday.
What denomination were you raised?
Lutheran.
Can you describe the church that your family attended?
Yes, it was a country church, and one that my grandfather, I guess, he pretty much built that church, with help of the other parishioners when they came over from the old country. And that church is still standing there. That's a picture of it there.
How far was it from your house?
It was, I believe, about 7 or 8 miles.
How How often did your family go to church?
We went every Sunday, weather permitting.
What were the seating arrangements like in church?
What I remember about that, the women sat on the left side of the church and the men sat on the right side of the church. They didn't sit together. Now they'd call that discrimination, right?
What about the children? Where did they sit?
The children, they sat on the front of the church. I guess that way the parents could watch them.
All right. What were some of the religious activities that you participated in when you were growing up?
Well, I remember we always had a Christmas program, and we all got or I guess you call it a piece to say. You know, we had a lot of memorizing. I remember that. I used to hassle over that. I was poor at memorizing things, and we had to memorize that poem, and it had to be said without too many mistakes.
Were you baptized or confirmed?
Yes.
Did you have to go to confirmation school?
Yes. I remember the confirmation school. There again, that was a lot of memorizing. We had to memorize a lot of verses in the Bible, and we had to. It was just. I guess it was for the good of us all.
Was confirmation school just at that church, or did you have to go elsewhere?
Well, no, it was at that church where we went to. We spent, a certain amount of, I think 2 or 3 or 4 weeks going to confirmation or classes every day. Then I think it was 3 or 4 weeks, and then we were confirmed.
Were you confirmed in English or in German?
English.
And were everyday services in English or German?
Well, I remember earlier that church. They had German services, and then they'd also have an English service. Some of the older German people, they wanted their German, and the younger people, we wanted it in English, and that's how all that happened.
All right. Can you describe your confirmation ceremony?
Yeah, I kind of remember we had to go up in front of the church, and we had so many Bible verses we had memorized, and we said those, and then we got a first communion. I guess that's what I remember most about that. I remember it was lots of memory work.
Did your family have a celebration when you were confirmed?
Yes, and they usually the parents, we had company after the service, and a bunch of people would get together, and they'd sit around and reminisce and visit, I guess.
Right. When you were growing up, were you allowed to question religious teachings?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, if you had a question you didn't understand, I remember that happened at times, and and I guess that's a good thing too, isn't it? I would think.
Did your parents restrict anything because of religion?
Well, not really. I don't think. They tried to steer you right, and I guess they figured, well, We tried to teach you right. If you don't go right, that's your own hard luck. But they were very adamant about strict teaching of the Bible.
How did your parents view people of other faiths?
They didn't. They got along as well with other faiths as they did with. There was back in them days. There wasn't a lot of discrimination, as far as I remember, about that. I think everyone felt they were pretty equal.
All right. Is there anything else that you remember about church and religion when you were growing up?
Well, I remember it was important to study the word. And I guess to do unto others as you would have done unto you.
Anything else you remember about church?
I guess that pretty much covers it as far as I remember.
Okay. Well, you've mentioned several holidays. Can you tell me which one was your favorite when you were growing up?
Holidays. Christmas. I remember that was kind of my favorite time of the year.
Can you describe a typical Christmas for us?
Well, at our house, it was a joyous time, Christmas time. Everybody get together, and we just after the church services, we'd all go back home to the farmhouse, and Mother had lots of good baked stuff. That's one time of the year we can just about eat all the sweet stuff we wanted. It was everybody got a gift, and that was something really. That was a lot of anticipation there. I remember you used to pick up the gift box and rattle and say, "I wonder what this is." I just remembered it was an exciting time.
Do you remember any of the gifts you received?
I remember one time I got a little. It was a little crawler tractor. I remember, and nobody touched that but me. When I was done playing with that went underneath my bed, and that stayed there. And I wouldn't share that with anybody. I didn't want it scratched up.
Did you believe in Santa?
For a while. I think that was probably, back in them days, I was probably 10 years old and I still believed in him. Until one time, I remember my dad, he was the Santa Claus. I remember I seen him out on the front porch. He pulled off his mask, and I knew it wasn't Santa Claus.
What was the costume like?
Well, he had kind of his own, he made his own mask. And it was different. Like I say, it fooled me for many years.
Right. Did your family have a Christmas tree?
Yes, we did. We not all the time, but most of the time, we had a Christmas tree.
How did you decorate it?
Well, at that time, before we had electricity, I remember that they had the regular little candles, and they put them on there, and I guess they had to be really careful because when that tree got dry, that thing would catch fire pretty easy. I remember one time in the church when they had a big Christmas tree, and it had those real candles on there, and the thing caught fire, and there was quite a commotion there before they had that put out.
How did they put it out?
I think they remember they took the tree down and they carried the tree outside and threw threw it out. But I'll never forget that sight. These older guys that were in charge, they took that tree out, and it didn't take long. I guess if that could have burned the whole church down.
Is there anything else you remember about Christmas?
Well, I remember it as kind of a happy time, and we had a lot of singing. We just had a lot of good times at our Christmas parties.
All right. Did your family celebrate Easter?
Yes, that's another celebration that.
Can you tell me about Easter for your family?
Well, I remember we all had an Easter basket. And there again, there was a lot of excitement there. We got some candy, we got an Easter egg or two, and just some goodies in there, and we just had a lot of fun at that time again. It was another family celebration, I guess.
Did you get together with your extended family?
Sometimes sometimes the folks again, we had a lot of company at Easter time, and then the folks would go places to their neighbors, and it's just remembered as a youngster, it was kind of a joy and jolly time.
Okay. Now you mentioned the 4th of July, that you always had ice cream, but what else? What else was part of the celebration?
Once in a while we had some firecrackers, and that was really something. Remember, we used to take them firecrackers and we'd put them underneath we had some metal water cups, and we'd put them firecrackers underneath there and see how far them things would go up in the air, see how much power they had.
Did your family go into town for the 4th of July?
In our younger years, it was the folks had a celebration right on the farm. They put up a little bit of a shelter. I remember my dad had some old header canvases. He put a few fence posts in the ground, and he covered so we had a shade there, and we ate underneath there. And there again, there was sometimes different. The neighbors would get together and just have a Fourth of July celebration. We'd play some softball and just had some fun, I guess.
Okay. Is there anything else you remember about the 4th of July?
I remember it was a lot of those 4th of Julys were very hot, especially in them earlier. Yeah, this temperature. We never had a thermometer, but I know it was warm. As you couldn't put your hand on a car fender; it'd burn you, or it was very hot and dry in them 30s.
Okay. Did your family celebrate Thanksgiving?
Yes, that was another big celebration.
Can you tell me about Thanksgiving at your house?
First, I guess what I remember, they always had a church service on Thanksgiving Day. And of course, they usually had a turkey, or my mother, she raised a lot of geese. Yes, I don't know what I liked best. I think I liked the goose better than the turkey after. But she always made a big dinner, and we just all had a good time. We sat around again, and we sang songs and just reminisced and had fun things to do.
Okay. Did your family celebrate other holidays like New Year's or?
New Year, yeah, there was usually normally a celebration. Mostly all the time. I remember especially when we were younger. When we got older, that kind of dissipated. But when we were younger, I remember there was always a church service again, and then a big dinner. And then we made New Year's resolutions.
Do you remember any of yours?
Well, I made so many, I think I forgot most of them, but I remember one. I made a resolution that I wasn't going to smoke no more. And you know, that resolution worked. I never smoked a lot, but it never did agree with me, and I said, why should I smoke these things when they don't agree with me? So I just threw them away, and I never touched them again. That's probably 60 years ago.
Right. Is there anything else you remember about New Year's celebrations?
Yeah, there was a thing. I guess that went on over in the old country, and that was kind of brought back. They called it New Year's wishing. I remember I and my older brother Vern, with a bunch of the neighbor boys, we used to get together, and on New Year's Eve we'd go out and we'd go to different farm homes, and we would knock on the door and get everybody's attention. Then we'd ask them if we could sing the old New Year, and we sang that in German. Right? They call it the New Year song, and we sang that, and a lot of them older people, especially my uncles and like some of my great aunts, they really enjoyed it because that was a memory that they had from the old country, and they really enjoyed that. I remember some of them old people, they'd open the door, then when we sang the song, they'd cry. But it still brings tears to my eyes. They took things serious.
Do you remember the song?
I don't think I can sing it anymore. I forgot that. I think my brother, he's got a better memory, and I think he probably remembers it.
Is there anything else you remember about New Year's?
Well, again, it was just a fun time of the year, you know, where you had another new year ahead of you, and it was, I guess, everything was a challenge.
All right. Did your family celebrate Valentine's Day or Halloween? Any of those holidays?
Not Halloween. Valentine's, no. Yeah, we passed out, Valentine's, but it was never really a big celebration.
Okay.
And neither was Halloween.
How about birthdays?
Our birthdays, we had a lot of birthday parties. And then 12 kids, not all of them, but they're probably not all in 1 year, but sometimes it'd take 2 years before your birthday was celebrated, or 3 or 4 years maybe, but No, we got we were recognized on our birthday. If nothing else, with a happy birthday.
Were you ever given gifts for your birthday?
Once in a while, not often. You get a card, you know. Sometimes you got a card with a few dollars in it, and
Did you have cakes or company or anything like that for your birthday?
yeah. Usually when somebody had a birthday party, there was a cake and there was some neighbors invited in.
All right. Is there anything else you remember about holidays or celebrations when you were growing up?
I guess that probably pretty much covers it that I remember.
Okay. All right. Can you tell me what it was like growing up on the plains?
Growing up on the plains. Well, what I remember about growing up on the plains, it was, again, it was hard work, but it was fun. There were many challenges of what I remember, of a challenge of how you got your work done, and just the way things were done back in those days. A lot of pitchfork work, I know that, shovel work. A guy got plenty of exercise, I know that. You didn't need an exercise program to stay in shape.
Can you describe for us a typical spring?
Spring, yeah, I remember the spring that Dad was always very, very concerned about getting an early start, getting the crop in early. And I guess coming through those dirty 30s, they learned one thing, that they had to make use of every bit of available moisture that they got and make good use of it. The seed that was in the ground early, most of the time had a better chance than the later stuff. The later stuff got into a lot of heat, and that, especially over in the western part of the state, it's even a different type of climate than around here.
All right. Can you tell me what a typical summer was like?
Typical summers, they were usually, I remember that was usually an exciting time of the year, summertime. You watched your crops grow and you watched them mature, and then as the grain headed out, the enthusiasm got more exciting. You knew you're going to be able to go out there and cut that crop, and everybody needed and wanted a good yield. And usually I remember if you got it in early, usually over in the western part of the state especially, it was a much better yield than when you got it in late.
Okay. Can you tell me about fall?
That was really exciting to start up the combines. And then you actually got to look at what you planted. You got nice bright wheat, and that used to, I guess that turned on all the farmers to now we're getting our increase, and that was remember, most farmers looked at that as a blessing. They really needed it every year.
Then winter. Can you tell me about that?
That was more of a blah time of the year. It got cold, but it was still, there was something great about winter also. You had more time. You got more time to, you could sleep a little bit longer in the wintertime than you could in the spring or in the summer. I remember that you didn't have to get up at 5 o'clock. You could probably sleep till 7:30. It was just a time of the year when things were more relaxed and so on, I guess.
Which one of those seasons was your favorite?
Spring. Spring was my favorite time of the year.
And why was it your favorite?
I guess everything in the spring, everything comes to life. You know, you go out and you see the trees start budding out, then they bloom, and then all of the it's just like everything comes alive. And that used to, and I'm still that way today. I still love spring. Probably still my best time of the season is spring.
All right. Then, can you tell me, what was your most stressful childhood experience?
Stressful? Yeah, I really didn't ever have a real stressful time in my life. I think I just couldn't say where I had any real bad stress in my life. I guess I was blessed beyond measure.
All right. Well then, can you tell me what your happiest childhood memory was?
Yeah, I guess one of my happiest times when our first baby girl was born. That made my buttons pop off in my shirt.
And how many children do you have?
5.
Okay. When you were growing up, what was the most adventurous thing that you did?
Well, there again, the most adventurous was I guess when we got together with the family and got all the cousins together, and then we had a lot of adventurous times, I know that. And I still remember that as probably one of the highlight of my adventurous times when I was growing up.
Do you remember anything specific that you did?
Well, we done a lot of fishing together. And then it'd always be a challenge which one caught the biggest fish. And it was just a fun time to be together. We done adventures. We just done a lot of adventurous things that I guess I can't even describe them now.
All right. Well then, is there anything else about your childhood that you'd like to share with us?
Now there again, I have so many things to count my blessings on. I guess I can't. It was just one big blessing. The way I see it, it was. great to be alive.
All right then. Why do you think it's important to tell your story?
Well, I guess if we could tell a story and make it lift somebody out of some of their trials and troubles or whatever they might have, it's just if you can do that, I think a story should be told. It should be it should be very important, I think, to tell a story.
Okay. Are there any other thoughts or observations you'd like to share with us?
And I think you questioned me about all of them. That pretty much covers it. I don't think I can remember much more than that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories with us.
You're welcome.